The Voice 17104.com. This is Zanetta Wingfield, and you're listening to The Voice 17104.com. The Voice 17104.com.
Welcome, my brothers and sisters, to the Richard James Show on 17104, The Voice.
Greetings, my friend. Good to see you again. It's good to be seen again. We've had a number of broadcasts, and we always try to lift up someone who is very, very important to us. Today, we're going to lift up Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi is an icon. Mahatma Gandhi, shall we say, is the father of passive resistance, nonviolent resistance, when one is protesting against injustice and inequality. A lot of things have been said about Mahatma Gandhi, but one thing we know, that if you look for someone who is number one when it comes to passive resistance, when it comes to nonviolent protests and resisting being attacked, struggle, the person that first comes to mind is Mahatma Gandhi. And he had some apostles. When we look at people who followed his philosophy and believe in his philosophy, the second name that comes to bear is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who totally believed in passive resistance. He did not believe in armed struggle. And he felt that we could get more done. We would have more allies if we did not lift up arms, advocate violence, and trying to bring about change and equality. Now, when we look at the Indian community, Mahatma Gandhi was the father of the nation. When we say father of the nation, he's the one that led the fight for independence for the nation of India. And by the way, India, and you've heard me say this, is the second largest country in the world. Large country, landmass, a humongous country in terms of population. Now, China has put restrictions on the number of children that the Chinese can have and trying to reduce their massive growth in terms of population. No such restriction exists in India. And India has, to my knowledge, close to 2 billion people. China has over 2 billion. And one day in the future, it is suspected that India will become the largest country in terms of population. India has a lot of things. India has come along. India is highly regarded in terms of medicine. I know many of my specialists that keep me alive and functioning and doing well are Indian. Wonderful doctors, skillful doctors. The vice president of the United States of America, Kamala Harris, is half Indian and half African American. And when I look at pictures of her mother, who is Indian, she's very, very dark-skinned lady. And according to historians, both of her parents were involved in the civil rights struggle. We note also that even in South Africa, with Nelson Mandela's struggle to end apartheid, that one of his associates, one of his affiliates was Indian, who went to jail with him, fought with him. lifting up what I refer to as the bloodstained banner, because those who uh, lift up the bloodstained banner generally is because it's dripping with blood, and they've been brutalized and they've been attacked. But Indians have always uh, been attacked. But currently, we have a young lady who's a former governor of South Carolina, former ambassador to the UN in the Trump administration, who is running uh, for the nomination to be a Republican nominee for president of the United States. So the Indians are interwoven into the fabric of the United States, as well as remaining a large, developing nation economically and in every other kind of way, improving itself. Now, there have been allegations and accusations in terms of Mahatma Gandhi. Some of the documents, emails, letters that he wrote were apparently racist. And this was out of South Africa. You know, he was born in India. And then he went to law school in London and then transferred to South Africa. And while in South Africa, he really objected to South Africans treating Indians with disrespect, as if they were low-life, inequality abound. And in doing so, he wanted to separate Indians from Africans. And you're talking about Africans' homeland. They wanted to separate them. And he made some, what could be considered some racist comments. Some say he changed and he grew, but in terms of his own situation, he came out of an elitist family, and some of the things he learned in his training, you can see that. Well, anyway, we're gonna lift that up, and then we're gonna do a video that will show his legacy and his history in the movement. And as a consequence to his journey, he is probably one of the greatest leaders that the world has ever seen. And his fight for independence for India was successful. India became independent nation largely because of the efforts and the actions of Mahatma Gandhi. You can't say that he didn't accomplish that. God knows he did accomplish that. He tried to create closer relationship between the Hindu population and the Muslim population. Islam, very, very strong in India. Not as strong as Hindu, but strong. Says is in some of 40% of the population. Ultimately, they divided, and they became two nations. Islam created Pakistan, India, majority population is Hindu. And you know, there are other religions too that are in India, not just Hindu, but the greatest majority of the people are Hindu. And so that there it is. There'd be tribe against tribe, brother against brother, simply divided on racial terms and racial lines. So we're going to take a look at Mahatma Gandhi. Let me just mention this too. There are many, many, many Black Africans. And when I say Black Africans, I'm talking about people like me. Black Africans. I understand over 100 million out of that 2 billion are Black Africans in India. There was a group of people that are native to India, the Druidians, uh, that are the original people of India. And they fought a war with the Aryans who were white, consider themselves white. They ain't very white when you look at it. White. They fought and defeated the Druidians. Then there are many Africans that moved to India. With things happening in Africa, conditions not the best, they left Africa and they moved to India. So you got a couple of classes of Africans that are in India. Those who are rooted, particularly out of South India, who are original Indians, and those who came to India from other major countries in Africa, like, for example, Nigeria, which is the largest Black country in the continent of Africa, has over 100 million people, more than that, to tell you. So we're going to take a look at it. We're going to examine the facts. We know that at some point that Mahatma Gandhi left South Africa. He went there and he practiced law for a number of years. I understand maybe a couple of decades, and that's a long time. And then went back to India and led the struggle for independence and freedom in the country of India. We're talking about a long legacy. We're talking about a man who committed his life to freedom and justice and equality. And we're going to look at all aspects of the individual. And there are many aspects of most people. Most people aren't perfect. Martin Luther King Jr. was accused of infidelity and other kinds of things. Yet he is an icon. Statue is on the Washington Mall. And he was the person that is singularly responsible for the 1964 Civil Rights Act. I don't say singularly responsible because other people were involved, including President Lyndon Baines Johnson, who signed it into law. But people accuse him of a number of different things. Some of them may be true, because no one is perfect. Martin Luther King said he'd been to the Mount Lots, to the top, and he looked over the River Jordan, and I may not get there with you, but we as a people will reach the promised land. He didn't get there. The man sacrificed his life. He died at the tender age of 39 years old, assassinated. The same with Mahatma Gandhi, because Mahatma Gandhi was greater in age, but he went out by assassination. It seems like when people are very effective and doing good, very effective and accomplishing their goals, assassination is a possibility. So we need to make sure that stops. We need to make sure that we protect. We have great leaders that are doing a great job trying to do for us, that we need to keep them alive, and we should also tell the truth about what has happened to them. Whether it's an inside job, outside influence, it doesn't matter. We need to keep them alive. But we're going to see the reality of what happened in India, what happened to Mahatma Gandhi, and some of the things and the trail that he left, his journey to bring about peace and understanding. We have millions of Indians that are here in the United States, all citizens who are contributing and doing a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful job here as human beings. We want to give them some respect and some love. All right, first we're going to do a brief review of Mahatma Gandhi. We're going to deal with some of the issues that have been stained in terms of his belief, in terms of segregating himself from Black Africans. Holy Chris.
Gandhi, a hero of India, a man who, through a campaign of non-violence, freed his country from the clutches of British imperialists. He was not just a father of his nation, but for some, he was considered almost saintly. He also liked to sleep alone in beds with his grandnieces and other young women, and held some shockingly racist views toward other races. Today, we'll shock some of you. We might even offend some of you. But we also think by the time we got to the end of this show, you will have also changed your mind as to how you think about Mr. Gandhi. Before we get to that, here's an abridged introduction to the man born Mahandas Gandhi on October 2, 1869. He grew up in fairly comfortable surroundings, seeing that his father held the position of Chief Minister of the Indian state of Porbandar. His mother was said to be a very pious woman, which is where the young Gandhi discovered the beliefs of cherishing the simple things in life. The religious devotion he saw by his mother would foster in him a sense of ethics that he later became famous for on a global scale. Things such as nonviolence, tolerance of others' beliefs, vegetarianism, and acts of self-purification were his badge. They were also steeped in hypocrisy at times. His beliefs were put to the test when he went over to London to study. Before he left India, he swore to his mom to not fall for the enticements of modern life, to stay clear of women and meat, and generally to uphold the beliefs she taught him. But while studying law in London, he witnessed late 19th century industry and all the horrors that could come with it. The streets of London were certainly not paved with gold. Far from it, many Londoners with their ragged clothes and dirty faces didn't seem to be enjoying Britain's industrial wealth. Gandhi witnessed poverty, but he also witnessed activism there. It was the same when he went over to South Africa, where he saw much of the population living in abject poverty. Gandhi might have been an educated lawyer by this time, but that didn't mean he wasn't told, like other Indians, that because of his skin color, he wasn't allowed to walk on certain footpaths or enter certain buildings. There's more to this story, but let us just tell you the good Gandhi story first. He was disgusted. There he was, an educated man who considered himself as much English as he was Indian, but treated as a second-class citizen by the Europeans. One time, he was kicked out of a train coach because of his race. Like many other people of color, his rights were taken away from him. On other occasions, he was beaten up for not making room for a white passenger. If that wasn't bad enough, he was barred for staying at certain hotels, even though he had the money to pay for them. The story goes that Gandhi understood the many wrongs committed by the imperialists, and so it was at this juncture in his life when he decided he was going to bring about change. But his resistance, in line with his religious beliefs, had to be peaceful. One of the most famous lines is, "Every revolution begins with a single act of defiance." And this is how he began fighting for the rights of Indians. This is how he got a name for himself as an activist, which on one dark day in Durban, South Africa, almost got him lynched by a mob of angry white folks. He spent several years in South Africa, but he knew that India needed him. When he announced his departure from Africa, a statesman wrote, "The saint has left our shores." This statesman was a white South African. He finished the sentence, "I hope forever." Back in India, Gandhi carried on fighting for people's rights. He'd been beaten up, he'd been jailed, he'd been harangued and oppressed, and he still preached peace. He might have supported the British war effort, but he also never shied away from criticizing the British imperialists. We apologize to our Gandhi enthusiasts for skipping over many years of his life, but we think most of you know that this man became one of the most powerful people in India. His form of Indian nationalism was embraced by much of the country, most of the country in fact, and they started to believe that with the right will, the Indian people could be free of the British. His activism got him arrested on March 10, 1922, and he spent the next 2 years behind bars, but he wasn't done by any means. In the years to follow, he would lead many of the Indian people to peacefully revolt against many facets of the British rule. His followers, and there were many, went to prison for their acts of civil disobedience. In 1932, while in prison again, he undertook a now famous fast over the disenfranchisement of those at the bottom of India's caste system, people called the untouchables. When Indians saw how willing Gandhi was to die for his people, for the rights of the country's poorest, it spread hope through the hearts of the nation. Then the Second World War happened, and again the Indians were expected to fight for the British. But this time, the Indian National Congress wanted a form of self-government if it were to throw Indian nationals onto the battlefield. Close to 90,000 of them would eventually die, not to mention the perhaps 2.5 million total Indian casualties of war. Before the war ended, Gandhi had already started the Quit India movement. And then on August 15, 1947, India finally got its independence. Okay, so what you've just heard is the condensed story of a man who saw cruelty and unfairness in the world and wanted to do something about it. He then took considerable risks in fighting the perpetrators of those wrongs, and he made it his life's work. It's now time we got into costume and became the devil's advocate. Here's a quote for you. Hitler killed 5 million Jews. It's the greatest crime of our time, but the Jews should have offered themselves to the butcher's knife. They should have thrown themselves into the sea from cliffs. It would have aroused the world and the people of Germany. As it is, they succumbed anyway in their millions. Yes, those were the thoughts of Gandhi. He was taking nonviolence to another level, and he was not surprisingly condemned for saying such things. While his belief might not exactly fall into an ugly truth category, his moral absolutism made no sense at all to some people, especially those under attack from Germany. When the Nazis were bombing England, Gandhi seemed to think the Brits should not bother fighting back. This is what he said about that. I would like you to lay down the arms you have as being useless for saving you or humanity. You will invite Herr Hitler and Signor Mussolini to take what they want of the countries you call your possessions. If these gentlemen choose to occupy your homes, you will vacate them. If they do not give you free passage out, you will allow yourselves, man, woman, and child, to be slaughtered, but you will refuse to owe allegiance to them. In hindsight, we all now know the many added horrors that would have occurred had governments followed Gandhi's instructions and just allowed Nazi Germany to do what it wanted. His assertion also sounds much worse when you consider some people now say that Gandhi was a racist. In 2019, in the African nation of Malawi, people were saying just that. In Ghana, that same year, a Gandhi statue was taken down at a university. You might think that's strange, given what we told you about Gandhi fighting for people's rights when he was in South Africa. Well, in Ghana, many people right now don't have much love for Gandhi, which can be seen on Twitter when folks use the hashtag #GandhiMustFall. Maybe you think it's a bit severe, but it sounds righteous enough when you know some of the racist things Gandhi wrote back when he was in Africa. For instance, he once wrote that white folks, despite their flaws, should be the predominating race in South Africa. You see, the young Gandhi, as you know, went over to England to get himself an education. It seems it was his dealings with the ruling British that convinced him that Europeans were just more civilized than the black people in Africa. We should say that he changed his entire stance in time and became an anti-racist, but it wasn't always like that. He also wrote in a letter summing up the beliefs to the British that the general belief seems to prevail in the colony that the Indians are a little better, if at all, than the savages or the natives of Africa. He absolutely thought that many Africans were savages, and he used derogatory language too when referring to black people, such as the term kafir. In 1904, he wrote another letter stating that he was upset about these people living amongst Indians, saying, "About the mixing of the Kafirs with the Indians, I must confess I feel most strongly." He wrote that as long as blacks were mixed with Indians, then diseases such as the plague would further spread. You can now understand why some people are now calling Gandhi out. They also accuse him of being a hypocrite, saying that he didn't believe in the rights of Africans at all, while also working with the British government in segregating whites from blacks. A stunning example of this is when Gandhi petitioned the colonial government in South Africa to ensure the Indian people didn't have to share the same queue as black people when they went to the post office in Durban. He didn't think it was fair that Indians couldn't queue with the whites. Some people now try to cover for Gandhi, saying he was just a product of his times, although one would think that a person of high intelligence would still have known right from wrong, even if they didn't always fight for what was right. Others now say that Gandhi was a card-carrying member of the Aryan Brotherhood, and no, we don't mean that bunch of violent, angry neo-Nazis whose pastime is smoking amphetamines and sharpening shivs. We mean the Brotherhood that wore suits and smoked pipes in dingy boardrooms. For example, when asked just how racist Gandhi was, one of his new critics wrote, "Gandhi believed in the Aryan Brotherhood. This involved whites and Indians higher up than Africans on the civilized scale. To that extent, he was a racist. To the extent that he wrote Africans out of history or was keen to join with whites in their subjugation, he was a racist." As we say, Gandhi shifted his stance, but how much he shifted we can't say. The question is, when he was telling people to lie down for the Germans, did any part of him still believe in superior races? You have to remember, when Gandhi was in South Africa, it wasn't as if black people hadn't already for years been fighting for their rights. You can't just say Gandhi was a product of the times, because he knew very well that a race of people rightly felt they were violently oppressed. When Gandhi was in England, he spent most of his time hanging out with intellectuals and the odd vegetarian, and then once he was in South Africa, he found himself having to share the same train carriages and join the same queues of a people he referred to as coolies. He hated this. That much was evident in 1906 when during the Zulu Rebellion, Gandhi supported the British in what he termed the Revolt of the Kafirs. These people, who he pretty much believed were barbarians, he said deserved British rule because they spent most of their days in indolence and nakedness. Again, people say you have to forgive him for his foibles. They say he had his road to Damascus moment and he changed his views. Nonetheless, as his critics still point out, even if he did hold some racist views on racial hierarchies, why could he not ever refer to African people as Africans and not coolies or Kafirs? His utter lack of respect for Africans was evident when he attended a dinner party held by the British imperialist Hugh Wyndham, 4th Baron Leconfield. Gandhi was overjoyed to be seated next to some of the empire's toffs, and he quite enjoyed his aubergine cutlets and plum tart. He gave a speech about his leaving Africa, saying he hoped the Europeans of South Africa would take a humanitarian and imperial view of the Indian question. But one of his biographers pointed something else out. That was the fact that Gandhi never said any farewells to any Africans, even though he'd been in Africa. That biographer said Gandhi didn't think Africans deserved a goodbye message. We hammered this point home just a little bit, only because you have to admit that it's quite a huge deal when a human rights advocate fighting to end discrimination went along with discrimination and human rights abuses. If he was flawed in public, what about his personal life? Well, things get even more strange now. Gandhi once wrote to his son that a person who marries in order to satisfy his carnal desire is lower than even the beast. He had no time for casual sex and human relations, and he himself became celibate at age 38. He'd gotten married when he was 13 but turned away from sex later. So then why did the Guardian newspaper write that Gandhi was prone to having weird, manipulative flirtations with young unmarried women? Why also in 2021 did some people in California knock down a statue of the great man? The answer is that some people think Gandhi wasn't just hypocritical when it came to racial equality, but also in relation to his thoughts on sexual purity. When it was decided that the statue in California should be re-erected, a group called the Organization for Minorities of India was dead set against it. When asked why, a spokesperson for the group explained Gandhi was instrumental in influencing national treatment of women in India. He said, "My life is my message," and the life he modeled for the nation was one of sexually exploiting his grandnieces and many other teenage girls under the guise of performing celibacy experiments. Gandhi stands accused of being sexist, racist, and also committing creepy acts with young women. Like other spiritual leaders that have tainted the earth with their footsteps, Gandhi has been called a predator, which we don't have to tell you is a really bad look for someone touted as being a man of peace with a pure soul. Nonetheless, when people are accused of such things, we should hope there's a lot of evidence, or even some evidence, to back it up. Well, he was against birth control unless it was the kind of control that involved a man or woman taming their animal passions. Once he said if people have too much sex, they will become soft-brained, unhinged, in fact mental and moral wrecks. Then, when he was an aging man in the 30s, he asked his young grandniece to get into bed with him. He told her that it was an experiment to see if he could control his own animal passions. As bad as it looked, he didn't hide what he was doing, which was to test or further test his conquest of sexual desire. It was written that he didn't care what people thought about it. One author said, when a close disciple heard of Gandhi's experiments with celibacy, he had threatened to leave the ashram unless Gandhi rectified his predatory behavior. His choices were clearly never acceptable. These experiments not only involved his grandniece, but other young women and girls at the ashram. He never did have intercourse with them, but let's just say he really tested himself. As for how his wife felt about all this, Gandhi never seemed to show her much love. He once said he couldn't bear to look at her in the face, and is famously known for denying her life-saving drugs. He certainly took a lot of criticism for the 2-week celibacy experiments, and he still does now, just as he does for many of his more conservative beliefs regarding sex and gender. To give you an idea about those beliefs, his answer to 2 women being attacked by men in the street was for them to shave off their hair so they were no longer attractive to men. Yeah, he blamed the women for a male problem. Even once went as far as to say that a woman's menstruation cycle was actually a manifestation of the distortion of a woman's soul by her sexuality. For many people, Gandhi was a racist with a predilection for sexually focused predatory behavior. Others say, leave him alone. The man did good on the whole.
Okay. Hey, look, let's end this one. Just end this one, okay? I think the point has been been made. Some of it might be true, some of it may not be true. When you have an icon and they lift up the icon, there's always some negative thing, and we said that like we take a look at Martin Luther King Jr. and some of the accusations are made about his infidelity and this kind of thing. Some may be true, some may not be true, but we know one thing, that with King's situation, Coretta Scott King stuck by him throughout his life, and even after death, she opened up the Martin Luther King Center and continued his legacy. We know that Mahatma Gandhi was a great icon, and the independence of a great nation with over 1.5 billion people at that point becoming free and on his own beginning to develop his develop in every way, economically, socially, in every way. Regards to what you think in regards to the negativity, you have to be at least respect the things that he accomplished during his lifetime. He was able to accomplish many things, and his nation now is regarded as one of the leading nations in the world. And much of this was due to the work of Mahatma Gandhi. I certainly don't like the idea of people considering my people were barbarians and that kind of thing. I don't know how true that is, but I don't care what they consider us. We are not. We are the original man. We were the first, and even in India, the Dravidians were the original people in India. And we continue to expand, we continue to grow, we continue to do positive things, and we continue to, shall we say, correct some of our problems. We have fought injustice and won in many sense. We continue to fight, and we're in a predominantly white nation, and even have climbed the so-called original person, the race that is, have climbed to have a president of the United States. We've done that. We've climbed to have a vice president of the United States. We've done that. I could go on with all the many accomplishments that African Americans have made. So there it is. But we will continue to take a review of Mahatma Gandhi, the world's leading advocate of nonviolence and passive resistance and lifting up change. Okay, we'll go right on to the next video that we have, and we'll see what happens. Thank you.
Violence until his dying day. On January 30th, 1948, he was killed by a Hindu nationalist with 3 shots fired to the chest. In 1931, Gandhi was interviewed by an American journalist.
If England does not grant your demands, are you prepared to return to jail again?
I am always prepared to return to jail.
Would you be prepared to die in the cause of India's independence?
This is a bad question.
The late brother of Gandhi's assassin was jailed for almost 2 decades. At the time of our interview, he was 85 years old and recalled every detail of the plot.
I am Gopal Godse, brother of Nathuram Godse. Nathuram Godse was the one who assassinated Gandhiji, then known as Mahatma Gandhi. The year was 1948. I do not repent for having participated in the act. We felt, let 10 persons go to the gallows, but let this person not live.
In the Indian capital, Delhi, there are several sites dedicated to the memory of the man to whom the poet Tagore gave the name Mahatma, great soul. The Samadhi, the site where Gandhi's body was cremated on a funeral pyre of sandalwood in accordance with Hindu funeral custom. The National Gandhi Museum. And Birla House, converted into a memorial museum after Gandhi was assassinated on its grounds. Every day, crowds of visitors flock there from all over the country, Bengal and Kerala, Uttar Pradesh and Manipur. Many Indians, rich or poor, still see it as their duty to make the pilgrimage and pay homage. The atmosphere feels more like a temple than a museum. One room has a series of dioramas depicting key scenes from Gandhi's life. Visitors remove their shoes to approach the spot where the Mahatma fell to the assassin's bullets. Frescoes, photographs, Gandhi's meager personal belongings, his notebooks, walking stick, letters, even his blood-stained clothes. Everything related to the life of the father of the nation has been preserved. When Mohandas Gandhi was born in 1869, India was firmly under Britain's imperial yoke. Like his father, he seemed destined to serve the ruling powers. His family belonged to the Baniya caste, hard-working merchants from western Gujarat state. Gandhi's marriage at the age of 13 was arranged. He and his wife Kasturba would have 4 children. When he was 16, his father fell gravely ill. Gandhi's biographers describe him as a devoted son who sat at his father's bedside.
Gandhi felt that he had a duty to nurse his father at the time he was dying, and hopefully he wanted to actually be with him at the hour of his death. But on that particular day when his father became critically ill, he felt more attracted to his wife, and he was actually in the act of making love to her at the moment when his father died. And it's a lot of historians who've looked at Gandhi's life feel that this was really something that coloured his whole attitude to his sexuality and led eventually to his deciding to renounce all a sexual relationship with his wife.
After passing his bar exams in London, Gandhi returned to India to practice law, but soon went on to take up a short-term position in South Africa. He ended up staying for 20 years.
Initially, in his early years, Gandhi in South Africa had lived the life of a rich lawyer. He'd had quite an affluent lifestyle. He hadn't really changed, become this very ascetic person, dressing in hand-spun clothes and so on. He was wearing Western-style suits. He was living well.
But then, on a train journey to Pretoria, a white passenger objected to Gandhi's presence in a first-class carriage. And though he had a first-class ticket, he was thrown off the train. He resolved to stay and fight for Indian equality in South Africa. When he returned to India in 1915, Gandhi was a changed man. The barrister had become a political activist. Trading his English suit and tie for a dhoti, the traditional dress of the Indian poor, he set out to familiarize himself with the social problems in his homeland, traveling by train across the country, always in third class. The movement for Indian independence was gaining momentum. Gandhi addressed crowds in every town and village he visited. He spoke of human dignity, justice, and independence. Across the country, nationalists organized bonfire protests to burn textiles imported from England. Gandhi launched his charkha, or spinning wheel movement. He declared it the patriotic duty of every Indian to spin 200 yards of cotton thread a day, and to boycott textiles produced in the mills of Manchester and Liverpool.
But it did become a symbol of a commitment to the nationalist cause, to every morning to sit down and to get out your spinning wheel and to spin your cotton thread. And they became very skillful at it. You know, they would spend hours every day doing this. And Gandhi saw this as something which was almost a spiritual task of spinning, you know, for the good of the nation.
In 1930, Gandhi led the 3-week Salt March, walking 358 kilometers to the village of Dandi on the Arabian Sea, where he defied the British salt monopoly by lifting and auctioning off a fistful of salt. Gandhi and his followers were arrested, but it was a victory for the man who Churchill contemptuously called the half-naked fakir. Coverage of the march captured the world's attention.
Gandhi had an innate sense of symbolism and mass communication. This seems like a contradiction, paradoxical for a man who came across as an ascetic, as someone who renounced worldly things in search of spiritual salvation. But he was a great politician and a great communicator.
Gandhi's weapons were civil disobedience and non-violent resistance. The British countered with truncheons. Colonial repression was often brutal. Prisons were full. Gandhi was jailed 7 times for a total of 4 years. His protege, Jawaharlal Nehru, 8 times, serving 9 years. From the beginning to the end, the struggle for independence was led by the Indian National Congress Party. Gandhi was its guiding light, Nehru its chief organizer. The two men shared a deep bond, even if they didn't always see eye to eye. Gandhi, from a traditional merchant family, now an ascetic clothed in a dhoti. Nehru, the anglicized Brahmin, well-dressed and elegant, with ideas rooted in socialism.
Somebody like Nehru, who embraced socialism in the 1920s, Gandhi was prepared to tolerate that because he believed that Nehru would always basically be loyal to him. So that he gave Nehru a sort of certain amount of rope, you could say, you know, to go his own way. But Gandhi would always be holding it and able to draw him in whenever he felt, you know, he was going to too great an extreme. And Nehru, well, he knew, you know, that it was in his interest to keep in with Gandhi, but he also had a genuine affection for Gandhi. Nehru's own father had died in 1931. And in many respects, you can see Gandhi as sort of as taking over that position of the father figure for Nehru. And so that they do have a very close relationship, despite their differences.
The two men were very different, not least in their views on religion. Nehru was a self-professed atheist, something rare in a country where refusing to express religious belief is a taboo. Gandhi was deeply religious. He began each meeting with prayers. Life in India is permeated by the values of Hinduism, which assigns a person's caste on the basis of birth. But Hinduism has been traditionally regarded as a tolerant religion, not given to proselytizing. Islam had expanded under the reign of the Mughal emperors in northern India to become the country's second largest religion. In British India, Muslims accounted for a quarter of the population. After the country's partition in 1947, that number dropped to 12%. Hindus and Muslims had long enjoyed a peaceful coexistence, until political representation was attached to religious identity. The Muslim League emerged as a political force in the 1930s, with the aim of protecting the interests of Indian Muslims. But a new goal emerged: the creation, after Britain's withdrawal from India, of a Muslim nation, Pakistan, or Land of the Pure. The party was led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who'd known Gandhi for years.
Both Gandhi and Jinnah came from Gujarat. They were Gujarati-speaking people. They were both lawyers who'd been educated in London, had received their legal training there. So in a way, they had a lot in common. But unfortunately, they came into very sharp conflict quite early on after Gandhi returned to India.
In 1944, Gandhi went to meet Jinnah at his private residence in Bombay. Over the course of almost 3 weeks, Gandhi tirelessly tried to dissuade Jinnah from his plan for a Muslim Pakistan. He assured him that Muslims would have an honorable place in a secular and democratic India. He even offered him the post of Prime Minister in independent India's first government.
Jinnah couldn't stand the affection and attention he was shown by Gandhi, because like many Muslims, he viewed it as a patronizing attempt by Hindus to assimilate Muslims. Gandhi saw himself as a universalist. He didn't want to be seen as Hindu, but as Indian. Yet everything about his style, his dress, was typically Hindu. His embrace of renunciatory disciplines and linking of ascetic practice with political aspirations, all that created the impression of a quintessential Hindu.
Shimla, the summer capital of British India. In 1946, the leaders of the Muslim League and Indian Congress Party met here to discuss ways to implement Gandhi's vision of a united, independent India. Nehru's knack for diplomacy failed in the face of Jinnah's intransigence. After 3 weeks, the talks broke down.
Jinnah's campaign centered on a single topic. Congress was a Hindu party with a Hindu leader. If Hindus won the first elections after independence, Muslims would face assimilation and oppression. To survive, they needed their own state, Pakistan.
So in 1946, he decides to take the matter to the streets. Jinnah had been a strictly constitutional politician before then. He'd been loyal to the British. He hadn't ever been involved in civil disobedience campaigns. He'd never adopted the sort of tactics that Gandhi had adopted. But in 1946, in August 1946, he decides to take the issue to the street. He's going to show the power of Muslims in India, and he has the Direct Action Day.
Jinnah's call for a Direct Action Day on August 16, 1946, in support of the demand for Pakistan, sparked an eruption of harrowing violence in Calcutta. 5,000 people were massacred and 20,000 wounded. Most of the victims were Hindu. That led to retaliatory attacks by Hindus against Muslims elsewhere. Reprisal killings spread across northern India. Entire families were slaughtered. Some Hindus now claimed their religion was too passive and lacked martial ardor. To them, the Hindu value of tolerance was an inexcusable weakness, which had for centuries allowed first the Mughal and then the British empires to enslave the Hindu majority. They felt the time had come for Hindus to assert themselves and for Hindu men to reclaim their prowess.
They wanted to reform Hinduism and boost Hindus' moral and physical strength. In every town and village where the movement had a local chapter, activists convened mornings and evenings for ideological training and physical drills to prepare to fight Muslims who were once again the enemy.
While Hindu nationalists massacred Muslims, Muslim League extremists butchered Hindus. Gandhi was horrified. He began a fast in Calcutta, which he vowed to continue until the violence stopped. He refused to relinquish his vision of an India where the two communities could live in friendship and peace.
And Gandhi was watching all this. He was doing his best. He went to East Bengal. He walked around the villages where the Muslims had massacred the Hindu landlords. And he talked to the Muslims. He really put his life on the line. He went without any protection, just a few of his followers walking on foot. And he managed to persuade the Muslims there that it was not right to do this.
As he walked, people would throw glass pieces on the way. They would throw excreta in his path. And his answer to that was to even remove the very simple sandals which he used to wear in order to walk and start walking barefoot. This had a tremendous moral impact, and the parallel that we like to draw is between, in the Christian tradition, the crucifixion of Christ, that is suffering for humanity, tormenting the flesh in order to make the moral appeal.
And then there is other retaliation by Muslims in East Bengal, where they're in the majority. They turn on Hindus and attack them, massacre many. Then Hindus in Bihar turn on the Muslims, and again they do the same in UP. And then in the Punjab, we see the Muslims retaliating by attacking the Sikhs and killing a lot of Sikhs in March 1947. So the whole thing is blowing up in a way that's becoming really completely uncontrollable.
In March 1947, Lord Louis Mountbatten arrived in Delhi. As the last Viceroy of India, he'd been tasked by the British Prime Minister to negotiate an exit deal with Indian leaders. Mountbatten appeared bent on hastening the end of imperial rule and soon came to favour the option of partition.
Gandhiji said again and again, leave India to anarchy, but don't partition it. We will sort it out. Once you are gone, then we will see how to do it. But the British said, we will go only after you decide who should get what. And that is how partition became absolutely inevitable. So Gandhiji went to the extent of saying that partition could only take place on his dead body.
And then, of course, the Congress leaders decided that they would accept the demand for partition. They felt that Jinnah was able to stir up so much trouble for them that if they didn't concede that demand for a separate nation state of Pakistan, then he would cause terrible disruption within India after independence and perhaps compromise the integrity of the new Indian nation state. It would perhaps collapse.
Sir Cyril Radcliffe was appointed chairman of the Boundary Commission in charge of equitably carving a Muslim majority state from British India. He was assisted by 2 Hindus and 2 Muslims because he himself knew nothing of India. That was why he'd been chosen, to guarantee objectivity and fairness. Most of India's Muslims lived in the north. The plan called for the creation of one state with 2 territories, East and West Pakistan, located 2,000 kilometers apart. But Hindu and Muslim communities in Bengal and Punjab were inextricably mixed. Drawing borders was an exercise in absurdity. On August 15, 1947, the partition between India and Pakistan was made official. As the clock had approached midnight, Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of independent India, addressed the nation.
Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
But the very morning after independence celebrations, Hindus in Pakistan and Muslims in India began to flee their homes. Muslims headed for Pakistan, while Hindus set off for India. Enormous convoys of people moving in opposite directions, the greatest mass migration in history. 10 million people were displaced. Many were attacked by robbers and armed militants along the way. 1 million people lost their lives. No one took responsibility for the tragedy. But Hindu nationalists accused Gandhi of allowing Muslims to steal part of the Hindu nation. We went to the Delhi headquarters of the right-wing Hindu Mahasabha organization. There we spoke to its then president, who maintained that his was the only group that sought to defend India's integrity.
Akhil Bharat Hindu Mahasabha was the only organization in India which advocated with full courage and expressions that we shall never tolerate division of India. We want united India, one India.
So although the Hindu nationalists claimed that this was a vivisection of India and it was something that the Congress had betrayed the Indian people in agreeing to, in fact it was very much a part of their own programme to have a separate state, and it's always served their interests subsequently to have a separate Pakistan state, which is always in antagonism to India, as always a representation really of India's other, its opponent.
A few months after independence, the new states waged their first war over Kashmir, a province with a Muslim majority but a Hindu Maharaja. The two sides agreed to a ceasefire along what's known as the Line of Control. It divided the region in two, with one side administered by India and the other by Pakistan. Of the 3 officially declared wars between India and Pakistan, 2 have been over Kashmir, and it remains a flashpoint to this day. On September the 9th, 1947, Gandhi moved into the Delhi home of his friend, the industrialist and Congress Party supporter Ghanshyam Das Birla. In January of the following year, Gandhi began another indefinite fast, saying he would only eat if he saw a plan to stop the continuing violence. Hindus who had fled persecution in Pakistan were dumbfounded by Gandhi's empathy for Muslims, which was inherent in the second, indirect goal of his fasting.
Gandhi's hunger strike was also aimed at forcing the Indian government to release Pakistan's share of assets from the treasury of British India.
Gandhiji, that stood in favor of Pakistan and said that I shall go on hunger strike, I shall die, and the 55 crores should be given. Then only I shall release my fast. At that moment, some youths like me decided, you will not die of hunger strike, you will die of bullets now.
Hindu nationalists found it scandalous that Gandhi would fast to ensure India respected the financial clauses of the partition agreement and transfer 550 million rupees to a country that had launched armed cross-border raids on Kashmir.
So on the 20th of January, there was an attempt. As far as I remember, 7 of the accused were present at the prayer meeting. They were Nathuram Godse, Narayan Apte, Vishnu Karkare, Madanlal Pahwa, and Gopal Godse, that's myself.
The attack of January 20th was botched. Gopal Godse was unable to reach the window from which he planned to fire his gun. He hadn't thought of bringing a ladder.
So I tried from the window. I could not reach my hand also. It was so high, even inside. So that was for half a minute or so. So I just came out. Saranlal asked to ignite a gun cotton slab near the boundary wall. He did.
All right, Chris.
Then
Chris, let's end it here. We are down to the end of our show. You can see the remarkable importance of Mahatma Gandhi and his whole effort, not only to create independence, but also to, shall we say, moderate or end the conflict between Pakistan and India. But he was the father of nonviolence and pacifist resistance, created independence, as we said, of a nation, and led millions and millions of people to freedom. There were some things that he said, things that came out of his background when he was earlier, and we hope that we will still be able to lift up this man in that sense, but also we insist on respect and love for our people. Thank you again for listening. I hope you got something out of it, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next week on the Richard James Show, where we will lift up important issues around the world. We lift up Africa, we lift up America, we lift up, shall we say, since we are the original people, any part of the world. So we're going to say so long, God bless, and God bless you, and thank you so much for listening. This is Richard James signing off. Take care now. Bye-bye. Thank you again for tuning in to the Richard James Show. Our African and our African American programs are set up to educate you on what's going on in this world. And thank you for taking out the time to listen. Let us hear from you sometime also. So this is your neighbor and your friend signing off. Until I see you again next week and hear from you again next week. So long. God bless.